Amstrad. Does that conjure up images of Sir Alan Sugar, colourful keyboards, bright graphics? Today we're going to see a few things, maybe a side of Amstrad we weren't aware of, haven't seen before. We know obviously they made a fine 8-bit computer in the 80s that tried to be taken a bit more seriously, but I'm sure, as we'll find out, there's more to it than that. But strap on your propeller hats, we might get a bit technical at some point, but who better to guide us through the ones and zeros than the man who inspired the name of the Amsoft video game character ROLAND, but Mr. Roland Perry himself. First off, Roland, you're a new face to a lot of people here. Do you do much on the retro scene? I know you said you've been doing some Skype calls and what have you recently.
Well, one of the things I found rather interesting was that when the 464 was 30 years old, I tried to get some people interested in doing some events, and nobody was, nah, you know, it's an old computer, why is anyone interested in that? And I tried again at 35, and again, didn't really get anybody interested. But now this year at 40, suddenly it's all exploded. And so I'm doing 4 events in the UK this year, and 1, possibly 2 events in Spain. And the reason why I do events in Spain is because it was the dominant computer in Spain 40 years ago. And so there's a lot of people in Spain who are really interested in it because that's the machine that they were bought for Christmas in 1984, 1985.
So could we fill in a bit of background then? Firstly, if you look behind you, I did mention the game character Roland. I know you don't necessarily want to concentrate on games, but obviously it will come up. Now I read that Sir Alan himself, not Sir Alan at the time obviously, but came up with the character and the name and you know, the likeness to you, shall we say, your namesake. Was it true? Was it his work?
Yeah, I think the thing was the first 2 games we got, again going back to the Spanish connection, the first 2 games we got were ROLAND in the caves, ROLAND on the ropes, which had 2 completely different names at the time because they were ported over, I think, from the Commodore 64. So these guys came over from Induscomp in Spain and said, look, we've written a couple of games for your computer because we lent them a really early prototype. And at the time, most game series had a named character in them. So you got Mario or whatever. And so it was his idea. He said, well, there's a little creature jumping up and down in both of these, and who's the little creature who jumps up and down a lot round here? Well, that's Roland, so we'll name them after him.
So just fill in a bit of background for us. What was your educational and then professional history before you found yourself knocking on the door at Amstrad?
Oh, it's a really long story. I mean, when I was first at university, I teamed up with a friend of mine, William Pole, and he'd started a component distribution company. He was more interested in what we call ham radio, and they were just transitioning from valves to semiconductors at that time. And so up until then, which was like 1980, 1970, 68, 69, 70, the people largely used army surplus valve equipment to go on the air. But that was all getting a bit long in the tooth, and people like Mullard were beginning to bring out semiconductors you can actually make more like a sort of walkie-talkie type radio out of. The problem was their minimum order was 100 parts, and there were no retailers of them. Okay, and so in order to facilitate people building their own ham radios and things, even my friend building his, what we do is we buy 100, sell 98 of them off. This is the catalogue that we had, a slightly later edition. So we started a company and we sold 98 of them off to the general public and kept 2 for ourselves to play with. And so it was a kind of win-win situation because we both got something out of that. So I worked there with my partner for a few years, and then something rather strange happened. Motorola brought out the Motorola 6800, and we used to get the reps come round to the office all the time, mainly to sell us transistors and logic circuits and things like that. And one day he came round and said, "Oh, we've got this new thing. It's a microprocessor chip." I was saying, "Well, what's a microprocessor chip?" And he told us about it. I said, "Well, I'll have one of those." And actually, they built it into a suitcase. It was rather a neat little thing. And I decided I was going to pursue a slightly different career, following up on that product rather than all the hundreds and hundreds of things in the catalogue. I then ended up working at the Syntron Microshop. This was in 1978. And Syntron Microshop was the country's third computer shop. And that was the brainchild of a gentleman who used to import peripherals for mini computers. So he used to import disk drives and tape decks and printers and all kinds of things like that, and sell them to people who had largely DEC mini computers, but cheaper, because there were people in the States, mainly in California, making sort of cheap worker-likes, clones, if you like, of all the peripherals. And he was out there one time, and he saw, these are things like the Altair. You could see those things were beginning to come onto the market. So he thought, well, what if I start a little shop selling these? Might make some money at that. And it was the third shop, because the first shop was the Bike Shop, which was in East London. And there was another shop in Newbury called the New Bear Computer Store, run by Tim Moore, who was a friend of mine, as it happens. And then I opened the third shop for my boss in Reading. So, you know, it's all a little club. And then we also started something that's been a theme throughout my life, is that little brown thing is a thing called the Computer Retailers Association. So within a couple of years, there are about 100 shops and outlets and things selling them. And I thought, well, let's rather than being rivals, because no one's going to travel up to Birmingham to buy a computer if they live in Reading. So we're not actually in competition with one another. Let's start a trade association, and so we did, and we had a couple of little trade shows and things as well. So that was working with Syntron, and gradually the computers that we imported, we thought we ought to make something more exciting. So I designed a computer which was, I don't know how many people remember this, but going back to CPM, so it was a 64K CPM computer on a card, not much different to the Amstrad card actually, and you could plug up to 16 of them in a chassis, and then you could attach 16, actually 15, come back to that, attach 15 teletypes or VTUs or something to them, and each person, so this wasn't virtual multi-user, it was physical multi-user, and the 16th one controlled the peripherals, so it controlled the printers and the disk drives and things like that. So we had this computer that we were selling, which cost a lot of money, all right? And we had a 30 megabyte hard drive that we put in it.
That wasn't cheap either.
And that wasn't cheap, so we bought that in from the States, again, and you put the whole thing together and it cost about the same amount as a small family car.
Yeah.
It was that expensive. And what happened was, we sold these largely to big institutions. I remember the BBC Research bought one, and they started doing, I don't know if you, again, going back, there used to be, in the newsroom, you had the news, a bit like this, you had the newsreader sitting here reading the news, and over their shoulder was a projector, and they literally used slides. So if there was a story in the news, they had to take a slide picture, process it, load it into a clunky slide projector, and then someone would have to sit behind the screen changing these slides backwards and forwards. Sometimes they get them upside down, but most of the time it worked. And so the BBC, people at the BBC Research Centre said, well, look, actually, there must be a better way to do this. Can't we digitise these pictures and then just do what you're doing? So they bought one of these systems and played around with that. There's a really large organisation, Post Office bought some to do some of their work as well. And the Army was looking at them to do their stores and requisitions and things like that. But everybody that I spoke to said, well, we'll buy one of your computers, It's awfully complicated. We'll only buy one off you if you come and work for us and keep it running. And I said, well, I can't do that because there's going to be somebody else walking through the door next week who wants to buy a computer. And if I'm gone, what's going to happen then? So, it was no. You find somebody, I hope you find somebody, but I'm not going to, rush off and help. So then when my old friend Willie Pole, back at Ambit, he bought one of these installations, and he said to me, oh, you need to come and run this for me. And that was the time I said yes.
Right.
So after 5 years, which was quite a long time in those days, 5 years in the microshop, I went back to Ambit and worked there largely as their kind of computer mainframe. It's almost a mainframe. It's only small, but writing software for them. And their shop by then didn't just have a catalogue, but it was doing had a little shop as well, retail shop. And in fact, the system that I wrote for them back in 1982 was exactly what Screwfix does today. So you've got a catalogue, you've got a VDU, and you go in there and you say, I'd like to buy a da-da-da widget, blah, blah, blah. And you looked it up in the catalogue and you found the part number and you typed it in, and a little chap scurried around the back to the warehouse.
Hands it in the warehouse.
And hands it over to you. And the main thing the computer was doing was, first of all, printing a proper invoice, again, just like Screwfix, but also saying, well, actually, we haven't got any of those in stock, sorry. Some are coming in next week. Do you want to come back next week, or should we cancel the order? And to a certain extent, you would say, well, actually, we're running out of that thing. Maybe we need to order some more before the stores are actually exhausted. So we're doing that project, and one day, it was in August, and there's a lot of false memories in lots of reporting of lots of things. And I've told people for years and years and years it was bank holiday weekend, but it wasn't. It was about a month before then, in August in 1982, and we were sitting there doing a stock check. Now, one of the reasons you do a stock check in August is because nobody does hobby electronics in August. They're all on the beach, or whatever they do on their holidays. So that business used to go down in the summer and then right back up again through the winter. So it's this very cyclical thing. So you pick to do your stock check when you're least busy actually shipping goods out to people. So what we'd have to do is we'd have to literally go around. Again, you imagine somebody going around Screwfix, counting how many bottles of spray foam they've got and how many drain pipe clips they've got and all the rest of it, and writing it down and typing it into their computer and seeing if it's exactly the same or not. And we're sitting there doing that one weekend, and Bob Watkins from Amstrad wanders in and says, oh, we're in a bit of a jam. Now, we'd helped people out of jams before, because being a radio company, FM tuners were the big rage then, quite difficult to design, more difficult than it sounds. Anyone can throw together a medium wave radio tuner and it will work. You can't just throw together an FM tuner and have it work. So we had quite lots of people buying the parts in small quantities. But you've got to remember in those days, if you had a production run of 1,000, not if you're Amstrad, they probably make production on a 10,000. If you're going to make 100 or 1,000 of some bit of specialist audio equipment or hi-fi, again, where'd you get the parts from? So they'd come to us and say, well, can you give us a price for 1,000 parts? So we'd order the parts in, and then they'd turn up and say, actually, I'm a bit stuck. I'm not going to need those parts unless we can get this thing working. All right, awfully sorry about that. And so what we do is we'd help them get their equipment working. So we call that Project Rescue. So we had a big department doing that. We also did lots of prototyping, which was important, because they'd say, well, okay, you sorted this out for us, can you build us a couple of prototypes? So we had all sorts of facilities in-house and close by, for example, laying out the printed circuit boards, things like that, and producing small quantities of prototypes and getting them soldered up and all the rest of it. So anyway, so in wanted Bob Watkins and said, well, I'm in a bit of a jam because Alan's on holiday at the moment, he's coming back next week and he wants to know how we're getting on with this computer. All right, and the problem is the two guys we hired to designed it, literally run away. They actually quoted 2 people 4 months
Right.
to design a computer, write the software in the ROM.
Wow.
It's all completely impossible.
Yeah.
All right. I used to reckon back then that to do that would normally take from scratch about 2 years.
Right.
You need half a dozen people for 2 years doing that, and these 2 guys, well, completely out of their depth. And what he gave us was, and you all know what the other side of that looks like.
Mm-hmm.
He gave us this and the case, and said, what I want is a circuit board to fit in that. Okay, because you've already got where these edge connectors are, you've already got the slots in the back here, where the holes in this are, you've already got the pillars here that's got to fit over. So all you've got to do is design me a board like that, and it'd be awfully handy if you could do it by about November. So we said, that's very interesting. And so I then embarked on, I said, well, I'll get back to you. I'll spend a week on this for you. Okay, free of charge. I'll just spend a week, I'll go around to some of my friends. My friends were working at places like Acorn and Sinclair and all the rest of it. And see if any of them have got, if they're free or if they've got some subcontractors are free. So I went and talked to the people, for example, who wrote the basic for the Spectrum and said, well, could you write a basic for me? And they were going, not really, and certainly not in that time scale. So I was going round all these people, and one of the stories that's in the book is that we had one of these, and inside there you can probably see the keyboard, which had been designed by the Japanese, quite independently of all of this. There's Amstrad on it. Okay. One of the problems was that Amstrad said, you can't tell anybody, not even your best friends,
Who it's for.
who it's for. Because in those days, you could get into terrible trouble from a publicity PR point of view if you said you were going to do something and then pulled out halfway through. Everybody got really upset about that. And so it had to be a big secret. So what I did was, famously, on the, we can tip this over now, famously, and also said Amstrad here. Okay, although it wasn't, that's embossed, it was just a plain label on it. And so what I did was I got some nail varnish remover out and rubbed off the Amstrad and wrote Arnold on it. And the reason why I chose Arnold was because I was going around and saying, we're doing this for a big UK consumer electronics company. The biggest was GEC. They had all sorts of famous household brands at the time, and their chairman was Arnold Weinstock. Although I never said so, I was trying to kind of give the impression that we're being backed and funded by this big, big company. And so I eventually ended up in Dorking with some people I'd actually worked for when I was at Syntron, or worked with when I was at Syntron, because I sold them some floppy disk drives and things. And they said, well, actually, as it happens, we can design, there's 2 sets of people, the hardware designers and software designers. The hardware designers said, as it happens, we can design Z80 54K computers in our sleep. Literally, only take us literally a couple of days. We've done it so many times before. There's some friend of ours down the road who've just written a basic for Acorn to put in their Z80 second processor in the Model B. And I bet they could just tweak that a bit, and you could use that.
Right.
And that's how the project started. So the hardware designer was MJ Electronics, and the software company was Locomotive Software. We sat down in the pub on something like the 8th or 9th of August, and worked out what the spec should be, and one of these here. So that's a very early spec. So that's the sort of back of the envelope spec that we wrote out. But there was only one problem. Amstrad said, not only have you got to use this keyboard, that tape drive, this box, and have all these holes in the right places, we've got a whole load of 6502s on order. So it's got to be 6502. So we turned around and said, well, that's all very interesting, but if you insist on it being 6502, we're just going to no-bid the project because we simply can't do it.
Right.
And you're never going to find anybody else to do it either. Because I've gone around and talked to pretty much every computer designer, you know, in the industry, and they're all too busy. I talked to people designing the QL design, for example, and they said, sounds like an interesting project. We're a bit busy at the moment doing the QL. So if you come back in 12 months' time, mate, we could help you, but we didn't have 12 months. So we managed to switch it to a Z80. And the other big thing we did was we said, rather than have, I can show it to you later, there's no more obvious to put it, I've got a circuit diagram for BBC Model B.
I have got one coming up as a slide, so
Yeah.
I'll show it there.
Yeah.
You'll see it in more detail downstairs later, obviously.
And it's the Model B, the circuit diagram, you see that bit of wall over there with the bricks on it, it's about that big, all right? The number of components in there is just frightening, okay? And we said, well, tell you what, Sinclair in the in the Spectrum has got this thing called a ULA, it's made by Ferranti. It seems to work for them. Not very high density. The one that we did eventually was 625 gates, 25 by 25 in a matrix. We said, well, what we could do is we could shrink down about 2 square feet of TTL chips and put it in one ULA like that. And we'll go and talk to Ferranti and say, can you do us one a little bit like the Sinclair one? Again, nobody could have done that from scratch. You had to go to somebody who'd done something relatively similar fairly recently. And so Ferranti, so we designed what goes inside there, and that's quite a big, I haven't got a copy of that. One day I might find one. So we've got the, if you like, the circuit diagram of those 625 gates inside there. And then most of the rest of this is, you've got the RAM chips, you've got a Z80, you've got a ROM chip, you've got a CRT controller, and so on. So each of these big chips is uniquely, you know, traditional chips. They're all old-fashioned chips. But we glued them all together. Nowadays, what you'd have, and in fact a few years later, what we did was we took these chips and stuck them all inside that.
Yeah.
Okay, but that was more gates required than actually the technology for the gate arrays, or ULAs, or whatever, different firms call them different things. So what we said was, okay, we could do this project, you can do it when you want. The deadline was basically early December. Have the people working on the software, the people working on the hardware design, and I can now sit back and relax. There's nothing else to do, except coordinate them. And then Alan said, oh, there's a problem here. You don't think you've finished, do you? Because when this system goes into the shops, it's absolutely essential that we have a catalogue of games. So this is some of the early, the first 2 issues of the Amstrad user magazine, and probably the first edition of the games software catalogue that went with it. He said that none of the retailers are going to put this in their window if there's not 50 games already to sell for it.
Yeah.
There's too many computers. If you look at the reviews of computers back in those days, a lot of them on things like Wikipedia and whatever, over and over again it says it's quite an interesting bit of hardware. They only ever managed to make about 2,000 of them, about half of which actually worked, and people only wrote 3 games, so nobody bought it. So we're going to crack that problem. So we said, well, we'll go and find these software houses, but they're going to need a prototype to play with.
Right.
Unfortunately, we're not going to get any of these chips until maybe the end of January. So we know what's going to go inside, but it's a long-winded process. So what are we going to do? So we then embarked on a much bigger project than actually designing the computer itself, which is designing a board, and there are some resources online that have got pictures of it, and it sits right on top of here. It takes up the whole thing. It's completely stuffed with logic gates, and it plugs into here and does the same job as that.
Yeah.
And it's a gate array simulator board. And we always gave things nicknames. The gate array simulator, we called it the gas board. So, so we had to designing the gas board and then hand building 50 of them, because he already had 50 of those on the way. All right, 50 of those, and we designed those and got them all soldered up and tested, and then I had a team of people who would go out to software houses and we signed up and said, right, you've been doing ZX 81 games, please write us a, please port your game over to that. And those are my two angels, bless them. They used to run around the country doing that. What we also did was we supported the people writing the games, and they were really very surprised at this. Not only had nobody ever gone to them before and said, here's a pre-production prototype that works exactly like the ones that are going to come out of the factory in 6 months' time. We gave them a manual that was 2 inches thick, which said exactly how it worked. They could ring me up and ask me all the questions 24 hours a day, and we had a big conference down at one of the airport hotels at Heathrow, which is just nice and central, and we handed out things. And this T-shirt I've got here is one of the few surviving ones handed out to those.
Right.
Just to give them a kind of some sort of incentive, feel like part of the family. So my job changed very much from project managing the design of the board to actually doing what I will call the frilly bits. And then somebody said, well, of course, you're going to need a welcome tape. Of course, nobody mentioned this. Oh, okay, well, who's going to write that then? Well, you are, of course, don't be ridiculous. So I wrote that, and we also had, we also got involved in the marketing people, and so this brochure here is again, this is all kinds of really high-class marketing material for a home computer at the time, but we did this for all the other traditional Amstrad products. I'll say we, Amstrad, did all their traditional products. So you did all that sort of thing. You all probably know Nick Hewer, don't you? He was the guy.
Was he on The Apprentice, that
Yeah,
Nick?
he was on The Apprentice,
yeah.
and then he was on Countdown. Originally, he was the PR consultant for Amstrad, and they brought him on board to do the CPC project. So he helped out with things like that. And then, of course, later on, you need to get journalists to write about it and be nice about it. Okay, and so we got Personal Computer World, which was the main computer magazine at the time, whose editor happened to be a friend of mine, although Alan didn't know that. And they did, this is a reprint of the article, and they, you've got one of the slides there actually, is the exploded diagram at the inside. So they did this glowing review of the exploded diagram. But that's a lot of work doing that actually. Drawing something like that.
I'll pull that up in a second. You mentioned Alan a couple of times. How involved was he in the day-to-day stuff? Was he just looking to his team for updates? Did he have any technical knowledge? How, what free rein did he give you?
He understood marketing.
And areas, of course.
Understood production engineering. Okay. Understood costing. Right. He knew this had to sell for, let's say, $1.99 in the shops. So it's going to sell for $1.99. You know how much profit margin Dixon's going to want. So you know how much you're going to have to sell it to Dixon's for. You know how much it costs to ship them from Japan. You know how much all the components cost. You know how much the factory in Japan, actually was in South Korea, in very early days. It was still very much a third world country then, actually. The factory, they're going to charge you money for actually taking all the components and putting it all together. So you add all this up to called a bill of materials, and it comes to £202. So you say, oops, that won't do, because no one's going to go into Dixon's on a Saturday afternoon to buy a kid a Christmas present when it's £202. It's got to be $1.99. There's no point in making it $1.98. You won't sell any more $1.98 than $1.99, but you'll sell zero of them at $202. So it's like a cliff edge. So he was very interested in all of that sort of thing. He was really interested in the way the thing worked. It was the first, and the software people thought he was absolutely crazy. I can see where he was coming from. The editor on the screen, you could press the cursor keys, and the cursor would go up, down, and across. Whereas every other computer is a line editor. All right. And the team was saying to me, well, what do you mean? Every other computer's just got a line editor, and you want a screen editor. And I said, well, he's right. If somebody sits there and they press these keys and nothing happens, they'll think it's broken.
Mm. Yeah.
And so it was very much a guiding, a guiding hand behind lots of the features of the computer. And people say to me, well, did you see him very often? I'm saying, well, I don't know, only about sort of 4 or 5 times a day. You keep on popping down and seeing how we're getting on, and phoning me up and sending me faxes and things like that. He's a great sender of faxes.
Right.
And here's one.
That's because the Amstrad emailer never worked.
Way before the time.
Yeah.
Anyway, this is from a bit later on, but everything went by faxes.
Right.
Right, and this fax here actually is quite interesting. This is from 1988. Okay, and it basically says top urgent. If you send you a fax saying top urgent, then you cancel everything. So what he's saying was, we've got some custom chips for one of the later generations of computer. They're making them in the factory in California.
Mm-hmm.
The project's running a bit late. We want them in the lab in Guildford the next day. We can't trust a courier. So this member of your staff who came into work this morning, what am I going to do on this Friday afternoon, on this Friday? Oh, go home and pack. You're catching this flight to California, then that flight to London, then Roland will pick you up at the airport, we'll take you to Guildford, we'll hand the chips over, which is what we did. And the whole, everything was done at that kind of pace. You know, and that's another thing that the design team, we eventually got them up to speed on this. And not so much these people, because they caught on quite quickly, but other people doing smaller bits of the project and so on and so forth, we'd say, has to be ready by Friday. 5 o'clock, 6 o'clock Friday, you need to hand it over, whatever it is, over to us. And they'd bring up at lunchtime on Friday and say, we're running a bit late, we're going to work the weekend though, would you like to, can we just bring it round 9 o'clock Monday morning? And I'd say, no, you don't understand. I'm going to pick that up from you at 5 o'clock on Friday. I'm going to hand it to somebody else who's going to start work at 9 o'clock on Saturday. Because we're working 24/7 on this project. We don't take the weekends off. So I'd then have to go down there and pace up and down all Friday evening, saying, come on, get it finished. And then I'd have to take the thing round to somebody else on a Saturday morning. And it's this frantic pace that everything went at. And I'd had a really good team of people who helped do a lot of that couriering. Some of it we did, most of it we did, the important things we did do by hand. Other stuff, in those days you had motorcycle couriers.
Yeah.
All right, and there was one Friday afternoon, I remember, I had 5 motorcycle couriers on the go simultaneously one Friday afternoon, moving things from here to here to there to there. But I had a team of people who would book them for me and organise them and make sure things were ready for collection. So that's kind of a little bit of an overview of how we got on and what we did. And
I know you wanted to talk about, so you mentioned you were kind of forced down the road of the Z80 processor, but you mentioned when we were chatting that you felt your design was much better than your competitors, particularly the BBC and things like that. The way, the circuit was designed, you felt it was more elegant and
I think it was definitely, it's more elegant, easier and cheaper to manufacture, did just about everything that the other machines did, plus a few frills. Like one of the design team said, oh, 16 colours? Why do you only want 16 colours? Well, it's not 16 colours, it's just 8 colours in brights. So and he said, well, that's a bit boring, isn't it? I'm sure we can do better than that. So he said, well, I've got this cunning scheme, we can have 27 colours. Will that be all right? We said, of course it is. Go on, off you go then. And that just took him 5 minutes to invent. We think that it was much more, say, manufacturable and desirable, and you could take it out of the box and it did something. One of the reasons for having the welcome tape is you could stick it in there, run the tape, and it does something immediately.
Yeah.
And that's really important. We did that on the later machines. We had equivalents of welcome tapes on later machines, which did the same thing. So, yeah.
So we...
Actually, sorry, the thing was, and the reason we could do that was because we were going down this road 2.5, 3 years after the BBC What will be?
Yeah.
We're doing it 4 years after the Commodore 64, probably 4 years after Spectrum. So if you can't learn from what they've done, what people have liked and they haven't liked about those designs, then we're in the wrong job. So of course you're going to make it a little bit better and different and more acceptable to the general public.
Yeah, it's interesting you said that when we were talking, because I think most of us in this room would see the competitors for the CPC as the C64 and the Spectrum and that kind of thing, but you were looking towards different machines like the Dragon and the Elan and the QL because you were a bit further behind.
Well, I think we looked at all the machines. We looked at all those machines because they're very much part of our kind of community of people, and we were very frustrated because there were loads of machines. QL was actually more of a business computer, or supposed to be more of a business computer than a games computer. You had the Elan and you had, the Dragon and all the rest of it, but they never really got them into production. And so, although some of the journalists said, well actually, don't you think this computer's got better features than yours? And you'd say, well actually yes, they have done very well. That's a really good feature they built into that computer. It's a shame they're never going to be on sale in the shop. Because the other thing we had was we had a long ongoing relationship with Dixon's and Rumbelows and all these stores, so that we could go along and see them and say, this is our product this year, because Amstrad's theory was they had a blockbuster product every year, and this was the one for that year. And it was, although we started designing it in '82, I think my years muddled up here, we started in the August, it wasn't really going to be in the shops until the following August for that Christmas. Despite the way we'd rushed the design in 3 or 4 months, all the rest of the processes take a long time. You've got to build a production line, you've got to ramp it up, you've got to test them, you've got to box them up, ship them from the Far East, get them out to the shop warehouses, train. Another thing we did, I was speaking to somebody earlier, we did a manual, service manual for it, because all of those big shops, Boots was the worst actually, they absolutely insisted, we're not going to sell anything in our shop that hasn't got a service manual. Don't care who you are, right? We're just not going to have it, right? And so, but luckily, we did one of these for every single product there was. So the year before's product had one of these, and the year before that product had one of these. There's hundreds of these in circulation. In fact, there's probably nearly 100 of them for the computers as well, all the various different variations and modifications. And so the service departments, which had nothing to do with me, even though 2 doors down on the same floor, they had people who just wrote these service manuals, and they come and talk to me and say, oh, well, not quite sure what to write in here, can you tell us what to write? And I said, do this, I said, okay, and then they go off and produce these books. And this made us look much more professional in the eyes of the whole industry.
So we put out a post on, or Craig did, on the event's social media, asking, if people could ask you one question, what would it be? And one of them that came in sparked a memory, and I know you found an excerpt in, was it Alan's book, about the 72k CPC for Spain. So tell us how that all came about, because it's not something I'd heard of.
Well, the thing is, there were difficulties in certain markets we had. Some of them arising from the retail channel. So, for example, the reason why we had a 6128 earlier than we were otherwise going to is because the Americans said, we love your computers, but we can't sell a 64k computer anymore. Everyone just thinks they're out of date. As in a few years later, it's, oh, we can't sell 8-bit computers anymore, they all want to be 16-bit, so it doesn't tick these boxes. So we rushed to 6128, but that was market-driven. In France, it was luxury tax-driven. So it was having the built-in monitor meant that it wasn't, it didn't look like colour television, and therefore people could buy it, and it was classed as industrial rather than luxury goods. So more of them sold in France because of that, and that was a tax. I mean, we didn't have to do anything; it just happened to completely fall into place. In Spain, after a while, they said, well, we want to encourage a domestic computer industry, because obviously these consoles and games computers and things are the next best thing, the next big thing. We're just importing 100% of them, and that won't do. So we need to encourage indigenous industry. So what we're going to do is going to slap a huge import tax on all computers that are 64K or less. So that means you can't sell a Commodore 64 anymore, unless you want to pay this huge import tax, etc., etc. And so our Spanish distributors came to us in a panic and said, well, we can't sell you CPC 464 anymore. And so what Alan said was, well, what if you stick another 16K in there? Would that be all right? And they said, yes, it is. That's fine. So we stuck another 16K of RAM in there. It wasn't connected to anything. Apparently this was following a noble precedent from the days of transistor radios, where people are always looking for, it's like cars, you want a GT symbol or a turbo symbol or this, that, and the other symbol on it. And you only need about 6 transistors to make a medium wave radio. So everyone was churning these out and suddenly when they shot 6 transistor radios. And then some people started producing 10 transistor radios. And everyone thought, well, they must be better because they've got 10 transistors and not 6. Of course, 4 of them were just rattling around in the cage, not connected to anything. And that's just the way things were done in those days. You know, it's 40 years ago.
So one of the things that you said, you'd moved kind of away from the CPC at one stage, just had sort of an overview of it, and you were getting into much more serious things with the PCW?
Yeah, well, that was the next year's blockbuster product. So you've always got to keep, what I used to say is, we're like an airport. We've got one plane on the runway, there's one that's just taken off, and there's another one just coming into land. So actually you need to get the one off the runway into the air, otherwise the one that's coming in is going to bump into it. And we had this annual schedule, so every year there had to be a new product. But because they took over a year to design, this meant you were inevitably dealing with 2, possibly 3 different products at the same time. So when this kerfuffle was going on with the Spaniards, which was in August '85, I'd virtually given up doing the CPC because that was all, that was last year's product. And even though it wasn't going to be in the shops until, well, we've got this thing coming up on the 21st of June, is when the first one was in Rumbelows. That would be 84, isn't it? That's why it's 40 years. So that was June. By August, September, I was already working on the PCW word processor, because that was going to be the next year's big thing. So we had to be working on that a year-ish before it was ever going to be in the shops. But we also had an idea that we were going to make a PC clone, PC 1512. So not only was I working on, not only did we almost finish designing the PCW, we're starting to think about, well, how are we going to make a PC clone? What's the spec of that going to be? So I was working on these kind of 3 phases of products all the time, and it's kind of unfortunate that I just had to let the old ones go because there just weren't enough hours in the day to do anything else.
Did you remember where this one was?
Oh yeah, well one of my tasks, you know, there's me doing all this frilly stuff, you know, writing articles for the user, you know, had a user club. Actually went and had lunch with the chap who started the user club yesterday. This is part of this package that says you can't just sell a computer, you need a welcome tape, you need games, you need a manual, you need point of sale material, you need good reviews in the magazines. Now I've lost my thread.
This picture you would...
Oh, that's right. The other thing that I did, one of my jobs, was if one of the foreign distributors was launching in their country, then I'd have to go and they'd ship the computers out, and I'd go out about 2 days before the show and teach them, basically teach their marketing, salespeople and the technical people how to set it up. So this is a small part of a big stand that we had in, it would have been in Atlanta, where we're launching the PCW 8256 in the United States. And so I would go out there for about a week and then come back, and I used to go to so many computer shows in the States. I used to go to CES and Comdex. This is what a show called NONDA, the office equipment show actually, because this was conceived as a piece of office equipment. It wasn't really a home computer.
Yeah.
And so I did all, and if there was ever anything like that needed doing, ROLAND will do that.
Yes. So, can you give us a sort of sense of what the feeling was in Amstrad at the time? You know, you're making these now more serious computers, and you're trying to get into, you know, the PC and PC clone side of things, going down a more serious route, but yet you're still producing, you know, games and game consoles at the same time. Was it a drive to try and forget about the games and go down a more serious route?
Well, I think one of the things that changed in terms of the company culture with the computers was that originally most of these blockbuster products were only expected to be available for about a year. You'd sell it one Christmas, all right, and through the summer, and then you'd have like, not quite a clearance sale, but you'd sell off whatever you got left in the autumn, and then you'd have a new product. So whether it was a CB radio or a camcorder or all kinds of different products, you don't expect it to have a product life of a year. What changed with these computers was they were still churning these out 5 years later. Right? The PCW went on for about 8 years. Okay, and so the company culture changed a bit. But you still had to be able, if you like, to forget about the old ones, because you certainly in HQ, you're too busy designing the new ones and sorting out everything you need to sort out for the new ones. And after this, we did at that time there, we would have been, say, halfway through designing the PC, PC 1512. Then we did the Daisy Wheel printer version of the word processor. Then I remember one of the ones we did, after we'd done the PC 1512, we did the PPC, which is the loadable computer. I remember going over to the States with one of those and waving it around to people. That was 87 by then. So every time you'd have this burst of activity, designing it, giving it to the production engineers so they could put it into production, getting the first 100 samples, rushing around everywhere, showing them to people, saying, you want to sell this, don't you? And then but as soon as it was going through the distribution channel smoothly, then we in the kind of R&D department had to let go of it and go on to the next product.
Now, I know you didn't have much involvement with the GX4000 in particular, but I know people will want to hear from you about it. You know, you didn't have a lot to do with it, and you were probably now on a much more serious path, but how did you view these kind of products as part of the company lineup? Did that bother you at all, or were you just going on to the next thing kind of thing?
Well, I'd handed over all the Amstrad 464 engineering and mop-up to one of my staff, that's Cliff Lawson. So he was dealing with this product, and I helped out a little bit. It was very much marketing driven, because what you had was, you had particularly the retail customers, retailers coming to you all the time and saying, why haven't you got a console? Everyone else has got a console. Why haven't you got a console? Can't you make us a console? We'd like a console. And eventually you just give up and say, all right, we'll make you a flipping console then. And so that's what we did. Okay, we couldn't make it 16-bit.
No.
Because that would have been a completely fresh design from the ground up. So all we could do was take the 8-bit design, fettle it up a bit, and also make it cartridge driven. Yeah. Because that's what the market demanded. Whether or not they then actually managed to sell any is another story.
Yeah. What about the Mega PC? Did you have any involvement with that?
Again, that was right towards the end of my time there. We were dealing with. We're kind of in two minds. Should we go into the Sega Nintendo market and compete with or we might call, say, the Xbox market or the PS2 market as it became, should we design one of those from the ground up? And we said, no, that's just too much like hard work. There's only 20 of us, and Nintendo and Sega and Microsoft have got 1,000 people working on these projects, and that's out of our league, okay, in terms of design. And people say to me, well, did you design this? And I said, well, in a sense, yes, because I devised the spec, I found the people to do it, and I encouraged them all to do it on time and to budget. But I could actually have sat down and done it myself. Right? It would take me 3 or 4 years. We didn't have 3 or 4 years. So I understood exactly what's going on in here, exactly what's going on in the software. You can't do everything yourself. You can delegate it to people. And we must have had about 20 people in R&D working on this by the time it was finished. So it's not a one-man job. But what I was doing was tying them all together, making sure they all worked together and knew what they're supposed to be doing and when they were supposed to be doing it by. Now, one of your pictures here is might as well talk about it now. There's a time chart. Can you find that on there?
Don't know if I've got the time chart.
It's one of the ones I gave you, I think. Maybe you can copy it over.
Possibly not.
I've got one downstairs on the table. Is that it? What's that, the circuit diagram?
That's the circuit diagram. No, not got the time chart.
Oh, okay, fair enough. When I was at college, what I studied was actually organisational management. Right? One of the things you did was you drew what they called at the time critical path analysis. So what you did was you said, it was all designed for the construction industry. So when you're building a house or a factory or something, first of all, you've got to dig the foundations, right, and lay a slab. You can't start building the walls until you've laid the slab. Well, actually, you can't lay the slab unless you've dug the drains and the water pipes, because they go underneath it. Right, so the whole exercise is doing things in the right order, one after another. So you put in the utilities, then you put the slab, then you build the walls, then you put the roof on it. Often you then put the middle floor in after that, because you've got a nice roof over the top of it, keeps you dry. The very last thing you put in is all the windows. But you need all these contractors ready to turn up to do their little bit in just the right order. You can't have the people who are going to put the roof on saying, we can't put the roof on because he's not finished the walls yet. So you need to put more people on finishing the walls up. And so there's this analysis system where you work out how many weeks it's going to take to do each bit of the job and what things have got to be done before. Right? So in fact, putting the windows in doesn't depend on whether anyone's connected the water. Right? They're completely independent things. So I did one of those for this project, and the art of doing this is to make sure that there aren't any sort of void periods where there's people twiddling their thumbs because they're waiting for somebody else to do something. So what you need to do is put more resources into the thing that they're waiting for, or predict that they're going to need more resources. So you stick the resources in so that everything goes tick, 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 all the way through.
Is this what you referred to as the Amstrad conveyor belt?
No, that's the aeroplanes and the models.
Oh, right.
Okay. No, this is the this is more just each project. It just so happened I'd been trained in that, and I thought, oh, I'd never really had a need to use it. I thought, oh, I'll draw this picture up, and that's what kept people on track. We had like, well, this is week 8, this is week 9. What we're supposed to have done by now? This is week 10. This is week 11. One of the things that plagued us, particularly on the PCW, but also on some of the later 8-bit home computers, was people kept on knocking on our door and saying, can we write the manual for you? All right? Because we're proper technical authors. We'll do a really cracking job on the manual. And I'm going, oh, yawn. All right then. Well, how much are you going to charge? Okay. And how long is it going to take? All right, that sounds fair enough. And when can you start? And they said, well, we'll start the week after you deliver 2 or 3 finished working machines out of the factory. I say, no, that's no good, because that working machine coming out of the factory's already got the instruction book packaged in the inside it. And in those days, it would take about 8 weeks to get a manual printed. These perfect bound manuals or wing bound manuals, used to take a very long time. It's not like just pressing a button like you do today. So the manual was always one of the very first things that had to be done. And so people working on that were really advised very strongly by the development team, who had to say, right, this is how it's going to work, honestly. And if there's some things in the PCW manual which sound a bit vague, it's because it was written before the software was finished. So you didn't want to sort of say, well, it's definitely going to do this. It was, well, maybe it might not. You already started printing the manual. Also, one of the kind of in-jokes, and I found one, I bought something the other day from Amazon or something that had exactly the same problem. If you have an instruction manual, and you open the instruction manual up,
and the loose leaf falls out.
Well, no. It says unpacking instructions. Take your cardboard box, all right? Undo this strap, undo that strap. Open the lid. Pull the instruction book out. How can you do that with the instruction book, which I'm supposed to be reading, inside there? Anyway, that's what a lot of these manuals did, and so they're still doing that to this day, which I find hilarious.
So when you look back now at that, say 1980s, 1990s sort of battle for domination, if you like, looking back on it, what do you think you did well, and what do you think you maybe didn't do so well?
Well, I think we've got a lot of computers out into the marketplace that did what they were supposed to do, and lots of people were very happy with them, and particularly events like this, I meet lots of people who say, I learned to program using your blah 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 computer, and that's why I chose to become a computer programmer or something. My whole career has been based on that. And it doesn't really matter if that career is writing yet more computer games, or doing some other activity that involves understanding how to program a Z80, or how to write a program in BASIC, or other programming languages that came after BASIC. So it's that kind of, it's that, PCW, in a sense, it's gone now, is my favourite machine, because it was bought by a lot of budding authors. There we go. There were literally thousands of people's first novels written on this, because they couldn't, previously, they couldn't buy a machine to write their first, they couldn't type it out by hand, that's just too much like hard work. They couldn't buy an IBM PC in WordStar because that cost almost as much as their car, all right? And then suddenly this came out, and everyone started tapping away, writing their first novel, or writing their first book about history of the village.
And it sold really well as well. Do you know off the top of your head the numbers it did?
I think it was about 8 million, or 8 million. And so a lot of people were very much, and the example that's used a lot is they were used by vicars to write their sermons.
One careful owner.
But they're all over, you know, they're still, I think some people still using them for their original purpose.
Right.
All the key tops were rubbed off, but what do you expect after 30 years? So that's one, in a sense, I'm kind of proudest of, in that it's changed more lives in a way.
So I don't think anyone would forgive me if I didn't ask for some Alan Sugar anecdote or other. Nothing too salacious, obviously, but can you give us a sense of, you know, what it was like to work with him, you know, on an almost 5 times a day basis?
Well, I think it was quite high pressure. We had a system whereby if a fax came in, this is the fax going out. If a fax came in from one of our suppliers or one of our customers, then what would happen is that they came in on a fax machine. We had this contingent that we called the fax girls, and what they'd do is they'd photocopy it 15 times, all right? Alan would write in the margin who he wanted the copy to go to, and they'd actually then run all over the building, plonking them on your desk, and you had to write a reply within half an hour, or you were dead.
Oh, you're fired.
Yeah, and so that got you kind of, really working hard, and then they'd go, tax girls would come around half an hour later and say, right, where is it? I'm going to take it upstairs, and he'd then read the replies,
Right.
and sign it off, and then off you go. So it was really high pressure like that, and I think that's, and take this one here, which is about a later incident. He's saying to somebody in America, you're going to get on a plane this afternoon and go to England. So pack your passport, darling.
Yeah.
And people just did that. I was very proud about the way my team, they worked weekends. Didn't get paid any overtime. Even my in-house team, they worked weekends. One thing we did, we used to go to computer shows. So there were quite a lot of ZX computer shows, and Acorn computer shows, and so on. And so we used to go to those, right downstairs here really. We used to go to those, not as kind of industrial espionage, we just go along and see, say, well, what are the up and coming accessories here? And we'd say, oh look, light pens seem to be the flavour of the month this year. I wonder if we could do a light pen. And you rush around and, we did one eventually. So again, it was just getting ideas, market research, and my lasses and lads, I'd say, oh, we're going off to the Spectrum show on Sunday afternoon, who wants to come along? And most of them would.
Right.
And that was just such a sort of team spirit we built up there, really important.
So at some point then, yourself and Amstrad parted ways, and you started a consultancy, was it, in Oxford? So what brought about the end of your time at Amstrad?
Well, I think I've been there about 7 or 8 years, and most of the products were PCs then. We kind of, I'm not saying PCs that were produced there's anything inherently wrong with them, but we became a bit of a Me Too PC clone company, and I always wanted to work on new things. There's not much you can do new
with a PC.
With a PC, you can pull out a 386 and put in a 486 or whatever, but that's about as far as you can go. And so I thought, well, this is not for me anymore. So what I'll do is I'll go off and use the skills that I've got in product development. I'll go work out of my house, which by then was in Oxfordshire. And the reason for that is because the young lady, one of the reasons I bought this, the young lady who came over married me about 6 weeks later. It says here, in view of the budding romance in our group, I suggested. So, and she went to work for Commodore.
Right.
Okay. Rather than working for Amstrad, and Commodore in Maidenhead. So she worked at Commodore. She was their marketing manager for their PCs over there, and she couldn't commute from Brentwood to Maidenhead and back every day, and I couldn't, so we bought a house halfway in between in terms of travelling time anyway. So she went off to Maidenhead and I went off to Brentwood. That meant that suddenly I used to live 200 yards up the road from the office. Okay, suddenly I was living an hour away.
Right.
All right, and that got a bit wearing as well. So what we did was we both left our jobs, me from Amstrad, her from Commodore, and started this consultancy together, which to some extent, we then did for about 30 years in one topic or another. Not all to do with computers by any means.
Yeah. So I'm just going to read a little bit here. So your personal contributions to Amstrad, and you could say the wider computer industry, your legacy as a whole, I guess, have been described as, and I quote, a reminder of the innovative spirit and dedication of pioneers who helped shape the world of computing. So I assume you're not going to disagree with that, but how does it make you feel when you hear something like that?
I just think it's all just a huge exercise in keeping your eye on the ball, and also being nice to people, all right? If you're nice to them, they'll be nice to you. And one of the things that Amstrad was incredibly good at was paying people's bills. So if somebody did a bit of work for you, you got the invoice, and it was signed off, and they got the cheque 2 days later. And we're sitting around saying, oh, it takes us 30 days or 60 days to pay invoices. And so there were many aspects to what was going, and nobody was ever in the slightest doubt what it was that they're supposed to be doing. The sir upstairs would say, this is what you're going to be doing. And I'd say, all right then. And then I'd go off and explain that to people. And then they'd say, well, why are we doing it like this? And I'd say, well, just because, you know. And people got the hang of that eventually. So it's, well, I used to struggle finding an analogy, all right, because people said, your job, what's your job title? There isn't a job title for this. And I said, well, I suppose it's a bit like being a film director of the kind of Steven Spielberg sort of film, all right? You've got a producer who finds the money, all right? Who has the idea for the story and finds the money, and that's Alan Sugar. You've got a script writer, so the director doesn't write, sometimes they can mix jobs now, but the director finds someone to write the script, he finds cameramen to film it, he finds sound men, he finds lighting men, he finds costume people, and so it's a huge team effort to make a big multi-million movie, and the person who's in charge of making sure it all gels is the director. And that's sort of the reason why the director, unless the director is a lapsed film star, which happens quite a lot these days, it's why the directors of films are more famous than often than the leading actors, and certainly more famous than the cameramen or the people who make the costumes or the people who, you know, all the absolutely essential things that you need to actually produce the movie and the film edit. Sometimes, very rarely, you get to say, oh, this film's been edited by so-and-so, it's therefore much better because he's done the editing. But overall, the responsibility and the organisation is done by the director. And that was the closest role that I could find to what I was doing.
Yeah, seems to work. So we'll take a few questions from the audience before we wrap up. If anyone's got a question, please raise your hands. Mr. Drury.
First, I'm very pleased you told me why you were a friend of Arnold. That was bothering me. So we got to that point in the story. Also, I use your PCW to write my dissertation. Your machine was a lot better than my dissertation. I want to ask about the Spanish link.
Yeah.
Often when we're in the UK, or whichever country you grow up in, is that you assume that the computers that became most popular is because they were the best or something. But it doesn't work like that. And you mentioned about the Amstrad being really popular in Spain. So my question is, I wonder your thoughts on why that was. It just clever marketing? Was there something about the machine that appealed to the Spaniards?
Okay, well, at the beginning, if we ignore this business to do with the import duty and the 472 and all that sort of thing, which actually kind of, in a sense, swept away most of the opposition, the problem they had in Spain was that, of course, they had lots of talented software writers. So I'd say Indiscomp did loads and loads of games. And the thing that had in Spain was, I was talking to a guy who ended up, he's now a professor of computing at one of the local universities, and he got a 464 for Christmas. And he said, well, the reason why I got the 464 was because my dad was a school teacher, and it cost him a month's wages to buy me that computer. And you couldn't buy a Spectrum, you couldn't buy a BBC Micro, the Commodore 64 was far too expensive, so in a sense, that was the only one that was available. Also, we put an enormous amount of effort into customising the things. So not only did we have a Spanish keyboard, right, all our machines, we produced versions. The PCW, I think we ended up about 16 or 18 different languages that it was done in. Not all of them are a completely different keyboard, but many of them. So the French have an AZERTY keyboard, not a QWERTY keyboard, for example. The Spanish have an ENY key. So we actually went to the trouble of doing that. We translated the manuals into their own language. Okay, we had I didn't actually bring one, but I was looking it out earlier. That's an English one. I've got a German one. literally it's just translated into German. Okay, and we used to have a German and a French translator working in-house. There was so much stuff going to France and Germany. The Spaniards, with the Indiscomp connection, used to do it themselves. And they had a guy who used to do the Spanish translations. And certainly when we were doing the PCs, you could get Microsoft's Windows, or Windows 2, way back then. You could get it in English, French, German, and Spanish. Okay, and he said, that's not Spanish, that's Mexican. It was what they'd done in California. They'd hired a Mexican to translate it into Spanish. So he was quite upset about this. But we ended up translating Windows into a dozen different languages. We were the first people to do a Russian translation of it. We did other languages we did a lot of was Danish. We did quite a lot into Danish. And because we bothered, like Italian was another one. So because we bothered to do it, then I think that made it attractive to the market. And they weren't just trying to read a manual written in English and figured that out at the same time as figuring out how to work it.
Very good. Anyone else got a question for Roland? Come on, Gareth, you've got one.
When you made the 464,
Yeah.
obviously all this was in motion, they were prepping the marketing and all of that, and I noticed that it had all the peripherals that were promised, and did you actually know whether those peripherals would work, or was it just, so during the design, is it something that you think, well, that should work, or?
Okay, well I think if we talk about the 464 to begin with, because it's very typical of the series, you've got a joystick port, okay? So you make it Atari pinout, so it works with an Atari or Atari type joystick. What can go wrong? Nothing can go wrong. You've got a 2.5mm jack socket for the sound, absolutely standard. I decided that as well as having our own monitors, particularly in the early days, a lot of software houses will be scrambling around for a monitor to plug in. And I said, well, what have they got? Well, actually, so that's the same pin out as the BBC Model B thing. Well, why make it different just for the hell of it? Okay, I'm not Apple, I make things that other people can use.
It's interesting you take that view of it, because what some companies do is make their own, then you have to buy their peripheral. You're making yourself universal on that.
But we didn't want to make money out of peripherals, okay? We wanted other people to design them, manufacture them, market them and sell them, because we were too busy doing the basic platform there, right? We couldn't possibly have been doing all this peripheral designing ourselves as well. We just didn't have the number of people. Similarly, the printer, that's an Epson printer compatible. The PC connector there, PCB connector there, is where you plug on the floppy disk controller. We knew, because the chap who designed this told us, that there's enough signals on there, you can design a serial interface, you can design a floppy disk controller. In fact, the floppy disk controller was one of the first peripherals that we ever did do. And one of the things people keep on saying to me is they say, well, why did you pick a 3-inch drive?
Yeah.
And because everyone else was using 3.5-inch. I said, well, actually, no. Nobody was using 3.5-inch drives. They only became famous when IBM put them in a computer about 4 years later. So it was a choice between a 3-inch floppy. There was a wacky little 2-inch floppy, which was in the same technology as the 8 and 5.25 inch. So it was like a shrunken one of those, and nobody used that. Maybe if we'd picked that, everyone would be going around saying, well, why did you pick a 2-inch floppy? We looked at a microdrive equivalent, but they had such a bad reputation that to some extent the 3-inch floppy was only shown in town. But it's got an advantage. You can take the 3-inch floppy that we supplied and plug it into an IBM PC, and it'll read and write the disks without you having to do a thing. Or the other way round, you can plug a 5.25-inch drive into the disk controller for the CPC range and write 5¼ inch drives without having to bother at all. And so you can write your software on IBM PC, download it onto a 3-inch floppy, plug it into one of these and see if it works or not. And that's what a lot of people do. So it's actually, it's quite a, I don't know, sensible, logical course of action. Again, one of the rumours that won't ever lie down is you used the 3-inch floppy because Hitachi had a warehouse full of them and they're trying to ship them off cheap. Well, first of all, they did have a warehouse full of them. Secondly, they had die-cast aluminium chassis, right, which is really expensive. So the drives were expensive, whereas the ones we used had a folded tin chassis, a bit like on a tape cassette drive, much cheaper to produce. The warehouse has got 50,000 in them, and we're going to build 200,000 664s. Where do you get the other 150,000 from? And the answer is, well, you ignore all of those sat in the warehouse, you just build them all from scratch, and every single machine we sold had a built from scratch floppy disk drive in it, because the people who, Matsushita, who are now better known by their Panasonic brand, they built a production line for us, because we gave them a big order. He said, well, what if we give you an order for 200,000 floppy disk drives, will you? Oh, stop biting my arm off, you know. And that's how it went. And eventually we must have shipped, if we shipped 8 million PCWs, and some of those have got 2 drives in, we must have shipped, 15 million 3-inch floppy disk drives. And then the media, funny thing about the media is it was designed to be puttable in the post, right? It's not quite waterproof, but it's waterproof enough. Okay, it's got a really hard shell, and what the Japanese thought we were going to be doing was literally just taking the bare, not even in the crystal case, just the bare floppy, sticking a postage stamp on it and writing the address on and sticking in a letterbox to send to somebody. That was the objective of that design that they had. So that it never really got used for that. But and people can complain about how expensive the black media was. Well, okay, they were about maybe 10 quid a floppy in today's money, something like that. But if you had a PCW, you could write, you could write your thesis for a year or two and still only need 1 floppy drive on the floppy diskette, so that's not a problem. It's not like you've got hundreds and hundreds of them.
Yeah. So I'm slightly conscious of time. I know Paul's got some jiggery pokery to set up before the next one. Has anyone got a final question before we end? No? Yes, go on, one at the back, last one.
Are you going to be about still at the show?
Oh yeah, I'm going to move all this stuff downstairs, and I'll be down there and I'll sign things for people and whatever. Yeah.
Okay, we'll leave it there then. Please,
Thank
everyone,
you.
join me in thanking Mr. Roland Perry.
Jeff Mitchell will be live at 1 o'clock, and then you're back at 3 o'clock, aren't you?
I am.
With
Indeed. Yeah. Thanks very much, Roland.